Hey, let's start the show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome to another episode of Cellar Door Skeptics. We've made it to 120, Mr. Hanna. 120.
Halfway to 240.
Yeah. That's like 2 full years of an episode every bloody week.
For what we've got right now, it's just a little bit over, man. I don't know. I do the same thing to everybody when it's on their birthday. It's like, I'm 34. Like halfway to 68, man. They're like, oh man. I don't know. But it's a little different with the episode numbers. Makes us feel better. It's like we're almost to a quarter of 1,000.
Well, tonight we have a wonderful episode planned. We are wonderful, yeah, not amazing, just wonderful. It's that's like fine. The step below to the right because we got Betsy Devos on again.
That's usually what happens when she shows up. Everything kind of goes meh.
Yeah, I mean, at least we won't butcher the interview that we have coming up after we talk about her. So tonight we're going to talk about her bombed interview, but we're actually going to focus on the statistical question she couldn't answer. Now, I'm not a statistic mathematician, and neither is Hannah. We both have taken statistic classes in college, and I just happen to like Excel and have nothing better to do with my time sometimes but to go through Excel. And so we found a website, and it is a little bit older. It's from 2016, but we found a website that talks about state school rankings. And I put a little bit of coding into it, got the difference between charter and public schools. So we think we're going to actually analyze the different ranking of charter and public schools.
Maybe we'll put this in like a doc or something that other people could take a look at, maybe, and they can look at our numbers and be like, okay, you did this right, you can make these changes. Maybe we can figure out if we have good numbers or if there's somebody has a regulation or a fix. Let us know. That'd be awesome if you could tell us what we're doing
and
wrong.
If somebody wants to put it on a bell curve, that would be even more amazing. Like if somebody wants to actually take that and analyze it, I would love that.
I'm going to give it a try, but I just don't have access to anything right now of any of the numbers. So maybe throughout the week we'll put out a second image or like an update of this data.
There. After that, we have an interview with a gentleman named Matthew James. He's from the UK. He writes a satirical book, very affordable book, about how Jesus Christ comes back to try and fix humanity. Now, we had this author on, I think, about 2 years ago, and he wrote a book called "Only an Atheist Can Save the World."
Yeah,
and I thought it's a shorter read, but it's a very hilarious book. He's wrote a follow up, and so I thought, hey, send me a copy, I'll read through it, and then we'll have you back on. Well, he sent me a free copy. And then I got about halfway through it, loved it so much, I just bought it myself. So I have a digital copy for Hannah to read. And then hopefully in the next 2 months, we'll have him back on and we'll kind of go through some of the plot twists that he threw in there. So then we'll end the show talking about nuclear fusion. So we're bringing the science segment back since Hannah can finally spend a little bit of time doing some research and isn't too busy preparing for his next child.
Oh, man. Yeah. This is a pretty big story. This is kind of like the starting points for something pretty big with nuclear fusion, and how this team in Colorado basically took it and they said, you know what, that thing that usually costs like $100 million to do, we're going to do this in a little computer lab, and they did it. It's pretty cool. So we'll talk about how they basically took normal stuff around a basic computer lab and created nuclear fusion.
Awesome. Well, to begin with, we have Betsy Devos. And no, I'm not very excited to talk about Betsy Devos. And there's an Atlantic article that talks about how she is the most unpopular education secretary. Now, I don't know how they came up with that, and I don't know how factual that is, but
I've seen when I was reading through it sounded like the most unpopular cabinet person is what I seen. I had to see if we can find it in the link or whatever, or in the article. But the Atlantic, seriously, I've been listening to the Atlantic podcast, and it's a great mag, man. I'm really thinking about doing some support for it. It's as a periodical, putting some money into it and having something, because I've been trying to find something that I can argue against with it, because it does a really good job bringing stuff from both sides of our political situation, but they also bring a lot of historical, and it's just really well written. Like this one, I hadn't seen this article. I had seen the Betsy Devos stuff throughout this, but I highly recommend, everybody take a look at some of the numbers, but go through this Atlantic article and just read it slow, because it's worth it.
Yeah, and so they talked about how her interview, right? And I don't want to harp too much, because not everybody's great at interviewing. We should at least be fair and say Trump obviously didn't pick her for her oration skills at all. And that's never been a forte of hers. She's never been a big public speaker. She's done some things in Michigan, but she's never really gone out and done anything other than like charity benefit dinners where you're kind of speaking to, the four walls, everybody that agrees with you. So
she's basically speaking to people she knows. Like she's comfortable in like the Ritz-Carlton dinners.
Yes.
But on TV with a journalist who's not your friend, that's a different story.
Yeah. And so they kind of reference back, and this takes us back a whole year. And I know there's been so much Trump, but if you go back a whole year, if you actually went back and watch the original hearing that swore her in, you'll see how she bumbles through that one as well. And I didn't remember that. I went back and I watched it. I was like, oh, holy crap. Like, I guess we should know this was coming. Though in all fairness, you'd think on 60 Minutes, she'd probably be a little bit more prepared. She's had a whole year to have this conversation. And in fairness, this is all about what she does for a living.
What she does now for a living, but she's been advocating for a lot of this stuff for years and years and years. And that's one of the things the Atlantic article says, is that it's like she had a year, and she really does keep an arm's length. She was even worse than Tillerson as far as not being in the news in person. And nobody was really talking about her. Whenever she did anything in public, she would just stick to the talking points and get the heck out. And they were like, okay, she's not doing a lot in public. Maybe she's really, studying up and learning the intricacies of what she's doing now for her profession. And this new interview, basically, she bumbles through stuff. She doesn't have very good, she didn't work on it. She didn't practice, I guess. I mean, she didn't do like a grizzly bear joke, where we need guns in schools because of bears. Like that wasn't that was one of the interviews that she had about guns in schools, and that made it onto Saturday Night Live. That was so bad. So she didn't do it that bad on this one, but she just didn't look like she had really any strong grasp of what was going on in the 60 Minutes interview. And it's just like they said, well, how did you not practice for this? Like the high stress interview, like you had an entire year, because we haven't seen much that you've done. I mean, there haven't been a lot of real heavy duty education policy changes. So nobody's really sure what she's been doing.
No. And that's, and you kind of wonder the same thing. I wonder the same thing. And then you kind of look at it and you go, okay, well, she did talk, about school systems and vouchers, right? And she's been doing this, even the talking point thing, she's been doing this for so many years. You would think that some of this would be natural on how to deflect it, right? You just would think that this would come out as natural. But they talk about, the voucher programs, and she basically kind of cuts her off, and she's like, well, what about these schools in Michigan? Do you know charter schools are doing better? Do you understand this, or are they struggling more? And she goes, I have not intentionally visited schools that are underperforming. The lady goes, maybe you should. And then she goes, yeah, I probably should. Maybe I should actually do this. And then it's like, well, hold on. Why you probably shouldn't have admitted that right on air. It's probably not one of the things you should have done.
Like, what are you doing? I don't know. I haven't actually gone to any of the schools that are not doing well.
Yeah. What do you
like? Isn't that your job?
You only visited the schools that are doing good. It would be like if you took it in my line of work, right? If in my line of work, there's like 5 departments in our plant, And if I were to walk to each department and base their evaluation and go, okay, this department's overperforming, underperforming, I'm like, this department is constantly late on orders. They constantly have 20 hours or more a week of overtime, but I'm going to avoid them because this department over here is doing really good. And I'm just going to continue to tell this department to do good, to be like them, and hope that it changes. That's what it felt like. And like, if anybody understands any sort of project management work, people would just be cringing right now. Everybody's just going to be going, why would you do that? And I can't even imagine that. You know, it goes again to Trump and his advisors' poor sight on cabinet positions. They should never have chosen somebody that can't, at least at minimum, understand that you don't take only the good and just shove it down people's throats. You have to actually address the bad and understand where it comes from.
I kind of think it's got something else to do with it too, though. A lot of these people that Trump picked in, like they're on the edge of the conservative libertarian perspective when it comes to things like this. Like Tillerson was notoriously, free market for when he was Secretary of State, and
True.
he just simply did not fill like something like 60% of the positions in the State Department. I mean, he just didn't do it. He's just like, screw it, we don't need it or whatever. Betsy Devos is kind of the same way. She's kind of like, I don't care if the system fails. I want it to go down and in flames, and then I can blame it for being terrible, and then we'll just do all private stuff. Like, I don't think she would, like Trump says, she's like, well, the Affordable Care Act is not, we couldn't repeal it, so now we're just going to let it burn to the ground. Like I think that's kind of what some of these people would like to do. It's too hard to get in there and fix it and make what we have better, or make real effective changes, or learn about the system. It's easier to just watch it burn down and then blame someone, and then maybe you'll get what you want. I mean, it's like they're and this is a business tactic too. Like, if you're a business owner, you don't put more money into a company if there's a chance it'll go bankrupt, because you're losing money on your investment. So you put as little as you possibly can in, and you wait for the returns, and you cash out when the returns are high. Like, this is how Trump is doing his stuff. This is how Tillerson did his stuff. And this is kind of how Betsy is. She's kind of like putting in the minimal effort, maybe getting some points for the things she wanted. And then she's just kind of like, well, if it burns down, then maybe we'll just go to charters across the board. I that's what it feels like to me anyways. And
that to me, that feels scary, right? That's a scary feeling, because if we're just going to let the world burn, that's not the way I would burn the world, I guess. But I do like to burn things down, but I don't think I would destroy everything that way. I guess that's again, and not that's. It almost kind of feels like a Trump model, and kind of like you said, it's a Trump model on how he ran his businesses. I mean, how many bankruptcies did his businesses have?
Well, it's capitalism. It's pure capitalism. The idea there is that, the pure capitalistic ideal is like, let the market kill what's bad. Let it just destroy it. If it can't survive in the market, it should be destroyed. And then it's weird to see those same people say, well, we need to step in because these places are too big to fail, or whatever. Like, they don't want the government doing that. They don't want the government coming in and saving the public institutions, the schools, the healthcare, the Social Security. They don't want the government fixing that. They want that to let it burn down, so then they can blame the government for it being bad. And I think they would love to do that. See all these public schools doing terrible, and say, public schools in big cities are terrible. Therefore, public schools are all bad. We should go to privatize. The roads in Michigan are terrible. Therefore, Detroit and Michigan roads are bad. We should privatize the infrastructure. Like, this is just kind of a tactic they have, and I would love to see what they would do if start from scratch, and maybe they would give us some ideas. But I mean, when it comes to her, she doesn't offer any numbers or anything, because you started to do some numbers and some things like that, which I would love to see if she would ever try to do that, but she never does.
Yeah. But before we get into the numbers, I do want to go back to that interview and divert a little bit, because we will. I promise everyone, we will come back to the numbers, because I did spend quite a bit of time on them. But I want to divert back, and earlier you kind of had touched on she didn't have a bear in the schools moment, right? But they did bring up a discussion about arming teachers. They talked about this. This did come up in the interview. And if you've watched any of her defense videos after that, she does some speeches. She did at least one, maybe two speeches where she kind of came out in defense of her opinions. And she's done she did another interview on one of the major news networks where they questioned her again on her gun views. They're like, hey, seriously. But when she was talking about it, she again wanted to flip-flop or move away from it. So she was saying, yes, I believe that, I don't think it's a good idea we should arm all these teachers, but I don't know, maybe. And then one of the questions that came out was, what about, are you going to only equip teachers, or are you going to equip people that are 18 years and older? Are they going to be able to come in and have a gun?
Seniors. Like seniors.
Yeah. And, it goes back to her idea of charter schools, right? Like, she couldn't quite connect the fact that, hey, they're leading you down the path of saying you either want the guns in here or you don't. And she couldn't quite connect the two, where she should say, no, I don't want guns in here except by trained professionals. Therefore, guess what our schools should be doing? Hiring trained professionals. Therefore, we're improving the market, and therefore we're putting guns for charterized, military individuals to protect our schools. She couldn't make that link. It took her 3 days or 4 days before she could ever make that link. Or probably somebody did it for her. I don't know. But finally she makes that link, and it's like, well, hold on a second. We could be arming people, but only certain representatives, and they probably should come from a private organization, demilitarized, type thing. And then I think of the Punisher show, and I don't know if you watched the Punisher on Netflix or not, but there's a guy that's like an ex, essentially an ex super high up, Marine Navy SEAL type guy, right? He did all these covert, weird operations. Guess what he does? Opens his own training facility and starts training people on how to, be private government contract employees to go in and kill terrorists. And it's like there's a guy that did that in Grand Rapids, actually, that's connected to all these people, and I can't remember his name now. Something with Blackwater, Blackgate, or some crap like that.
Blackstone. It's Betsy Devos'. It's Betsy DeVos's brother.
Look, okay, so there you go. But that's the same type of mentality that was in The Punisher. And all of a sudden, hey, look, now what do we hear from her? She's now advocating guns in schools, but only by a charter type, libertarian viewpoint of allowing a sect of, non-government employees to come in and police the schools. Next thing you know, they're going to be replacing all the police with privatized police forces, and we already have, privatized systems. Next thing you know, all these people are just going to be for rent, and you lose that whole basis of what a government really is.
Well, I just even if you want to bring in, instead of hiring or giving teachers guns to schools, they want to bring in, a security officer, or they want to bring in, a paid gun operator, or somebody that would come in and just be security. But you have to give the schools more money in order to pay for that person. Like, you can't say, okay, you have to hire a security official and you have to pay them, a security wage or whatever. But then you're going to cut one of the teachers so that you can pay for the security person. So you're going to make school worse to add a gun to protect it. I mean,
or they'll just wrap it up in the tuition. Think about it that way. If it's all charter schools, they're going to wrap it up.
Well, if
in
it's
the tuition.
charter, I'm talking public schools.
Well, they're just going to. She's getting rid of.
Yes.
She's getting rid of all public schools. Come on, man. We just talked about that.
Yep. So that's basically what it is. Is just if you want to do something like that, it would cost the public schools to do that. But also, she's not going to put forth more money to cover those costs. So that's just something that's well, you just got to absorb this. This is part of life or whatever. But the charter schools and private schools have the way to increase funds. They would just start charging more for tuitions or whatever that they anything that they add to it. So that those are some of the differences that those market swing economy things like government institutions. You have to get tax increases and millages and stuff like that. Just way harder. But those are the ones that are gonna protect the smaller schools that are in the city that don't have anybody around that can afford going to better schools and stuff like that. So I find it hard to believe that bringing in private security officials is going to be something that they're going to want to pay for.
This is Deborah McTaggart, the voice of Beatrice Johnson from Atheist Apocalypse Podcast, and you are listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
If you'd like to join the ranks of Patreons and sponsor the show, head over to patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics. For less than a 20-ounce soda or an energy drink each week, you can help sponsor us, the hosts, and our charity of choice. Patreon helps Cellar Door Skeptics create better content, become better activists, and it's going to help you stay healthier by drinking one less soda or one less energy drink each week. Click the link in the notes of the show to sponsor us today, because we bring the discussion with the sources.
Hey, my name is Wesley. I'm from the Atheist Nomads podcast. Kick back a while and listen to my friends on the Cellar Door Skeptics.
Now, back to the show.
Yeah, I agree with you. So what do you say we jump into the actual numbers, Hannah? We spent enough time talking about her interview.
Our opinions.
Yeah. It almost kind of felt like a through the attic window. So let's talk about the school ranking. And yes, there is a new ranking system that is going to come out. We'll cover that towards the end of the segment. But so I did a quick Google search, right? You know, you figure something anybody can do. And they have 2016 school rankings and reward school status at a glance. This is an official government website. This is not some third party. This is actually from Michigan.gov. Now, maybe some of you are on the conspiratorial side that you think that essentially they could fake this. I disagree with you. We have a link to the actual report. You can download a CSV for this and throw it into Excel, or if you're a Google person in Google Sheets, and then you can run all your own numbers. I happened to throw it into my Excel, went through all sorts of different numbers, came up with the calculations, and thought it would be fun to talk about. So before we get into it, we got a couple of definitions we got to define, right? One of them is they have two specific rankings that they use. One is called a statewide school ranking. The other one is called an achievement gap ranking. Now, I made a phone call this week, and I talked through this with a teacher that actually has to analyze the numbers for their school. So we've had her on the program before, but I have a friend that has come on and actually talked about this in the past, and maybe we'll find the link to that show and throw it in the description. But I went through this with her to try and understand what these numbers were. Essentially, the statewide school ranking number includes specific performance tests given to the schools. The tests are mathematics, English, science, and social studies. Essentially, they have a rating percentile between 0 and 99, 99 being the highest, 0 being the lowest. So these statewide school rankings is literally just the ranking you get for the scores you get, however it is included. They do say they only rank schools that have, essentially given assessments for 2 years.
Okay, so it's not like a brand new school the first time they do terrible their first year, and they get a couple years to establish the school and their curriculum and everything.
Exactly. And so it's not like you're just taking a startup and saying, "Yep, we're going to throw that into the mix." They also have a reward system that they call a reward system. They call it a reward system, and it's for the top 5% overall ranked schools, and top 5% improved schools will get designated as a reward school. So we had to separate out their ranking from the reward. We did that. We did that. We will talk about the reward percentage, and we will talk about the overall percentage. Then they have what's called a achievement gap school ranking. The school ranking for achievement gaps essentially talks about the top 30% and the top bottom 30% of students. And what they do is they put it on an average scale for, again, the exact same subjects we talked about: mathematics, English, science, and social studies. And what they do is they take that and they base that so that you can kind of see the depth of the gap. So, for example, if a school has a 4% achievement gap ranking, that 4% essentially means that there is a huge gap between the top 30 and the bottom 30. which probably means they're not focused aggressively. They're probably focused aggressively on a certain type of school. So a lot of charter schools specifically will focus on different areas. You know, you could have like a tech school. They do some of these other things, but they're really technical. You want to learn SAP or you want to learn how to electrically wire something. That's what some of these are, right?
Yeah, so their English rankings would be really low, which means they would be a low ranking as far as the achievement gap is concerned.
Yeah. So you have to take that into account, because again, if you had a school that's in the 99 percentile, right? But then that
they're doing
school
everything well.
Yeah, except for if their gap is in the 1%, then you know that there's a huge disparity. And if you don't fit into, you know, the top or the bottom of it, you're probably being left out and not as educated as if you were in a different school. So if you had a 99.9 or 99 in both categories, and yes, that did happen, and I'll tell the school in a minute, then what would happen is then that school specifically would be, you know, a really, really good school to go to.
So basically what you're looking for is you're looking for a higher achievement gap or a lower achievement gap?
A higher one. So the 99 means you're closer together, and that's what you want. A 1 or a 2 is bad. So for example, Engle School, and I don't know where Engle is, it's in Ann Arbor. One of the Ann Arbor schools is a 99 statewide percentile and a 75 in the achievement gap. Whereas Achieve Charter Academy is a 99 percentile, right? They're a really good school, but they're in the 30th achievement gap, which means that there's a lot more discrepancy between their children, so they're not being equally taught.
Okay.
So my friend says it can go anywhere between, it could be because they're focusing on the top or the bottom too much. It could mean that they're so technical that they avoid certain aspects, so a lot of students do bad on these certain types of exams. They could focus specifically on low-income students, right? They could specifically just focus on taking lower-income students in that are struggling at other schools. She actually worked at one of those schools. Or they could be the opposite side, focusing on, you know, higher achieving schools.
Okay. So,
and only that.
So the idea is that, like, if you were at a tech school that concentrates on prepping you for MIT per se, so you're going to get like basic general information on, you know, the arts and English, but you're going to get super heavy on the physics and math. And those kids that are going to that prep school are probably really good at that. But when they do this like the Blue Book state test, they're probably going to do average to poorly on the arts and the science, and do really well on the sciences. So that's going to weight. And so the kids that do poorly on the math as well, they're going to do poorly on everything. And those kids, the ones that do poorly on the math at the math technical school, are the ones that we're talking about that are doing poorly in that school. So that drives the gap in the school further apart.
It could, yeah. And so that's where the nuance, there's a nuance, you know, that comes into that, obviously.
Okay.
So I don't know. Like I said, it's a very interesting find. So the first thing I think we should do, Anna, is we actually got to talk about the schools, right? You know, how many charter schools are there versus
public schools?
And that's only in Michigan. So why don't you read the number off?
The total count that you had was 308 for charters and 2407 for public schools.
So if we had to take that, right, that district, what would that mean in terms of percentage? What's your ratio between charter schools and public schools?
The ratio total out of what? So just the number of charter schools versus the number of public schools.
Yeah, out of the total schools.
Yeah, so that was 308 schools, and you just break that into the total between 308 and 2407, which is 2407, and that was 12.8% of the schools in Michigan are charter schools.
Yeah. So just so everybody understands, there, you know, and again, this is not going to tell you exactly which charter school is, you know, getting funding, which ones don't, right? You know, that doesn't go into that whole thing, but it does tell us that, you know, there's quite a few charter schools out there. So when people try and say, well, there's not enough, that's quite a few. You're getting 12%. Would you say 12%?
Yeah, 12.8.
It's giving you, so almost 13%. So what that does is that's giving you a ability here to have school of choice. Now, that's not going to be as much as what they prefer, right?
Yeah.
They're going to prefer more.
I would think that, almost 13% of the total schools in the state, obviously they're going to be concentrated around metropolitan areas. So the UP, sorry guys, you probably only have a few charter schools, but if you do think about it, like a 13%, so let's round up. We got a nice even 15% potentially of charter schools in this state. That should be a heavy enough number to get a decent idea of how they perform. And that would be the thing for me. So if like the charter schools are doing just significantly better based on a different education system, or an education reform system that's just light and day doing better, I would think that 300 plus schools in the state would be a good, statistical testing the waters, so to speak, because that's kind of what we want, right? We want to do a small test study, and then we can check it and see if it scales up. So maybe you run a couple of charter schools. Hey, they're doing okay. We'll scale up. Now they're at 300, around 13% in the state. Are they doing really well? That's what we're going to try to take a look at. And let's say they're doing just as good as public schools. Well, then, scale them up. They're not a major detriment according to the numbers. Or if they're doing poorly, then yeah, this is a place where we could criticize them. So I guess what did we find, or what did you find? Because you were doing a number crunching on this one.
Well, to begin with, the first thing that we found was we took the reward system. So let's go ahead and let's take that. So out of the reward system, and again, this is your top 5% changed or top 5% overall, one of the two. And they're only rewarded to schools in the 90% or above, percentile. So out of the 308 schools, 16 charter schools qualified. Out of the 2,407 public schools, 203 qualified. That puts the ratio of charter 5% and public schools 8.5%. So if you take your top 5% improvements, 8.5%, over, the majority of those, 85% of those or more, are going to have improvement, right?
So basically the top fives increase. So like the top 5 schools that increase the most are the ones we're talking about, and then obviously the top 5 that were what was it? The other one was the ranked top 5 overall. Yes.
Yep.
So the 5 that got the most change. So if you were at the very bottom and went to the middle, you would be one of the top 5 improvement schools. Or if you were one of the top 5 that's just at the top because you got awesome. So charter schools are at 5% and public schools are at 8.5%. To me, that is not, a whitewash slap in the face. Wow, charter schools are unbelievably better. Like if you are subscribing to the idea of school of choice, like this is a choice that it should be night and day. There's no question that this is a much, much better system. So, performance-wise, it might not be so much that way. So maybe they're looking for something else. I would say charter schools are something that are going to be more of maintaining your bubble, the social clique that you're in, as opposed to what it looks like here as far as performance. Not so much.
Yeah. Now, the next thing that we looked at on a higher level, and we'll just start with the higher level first, is, we took the charter schools and the public schools, and we did what is the average of all the schools for your statewide average, and then we'll talk about your gap.
So you took the number that these schools get, so like a 24 school and a 65 school.
We just averaged them all out. Now, we didn't do any weight, we didn't do any medians, and this is where that bell curve would actually come in and help a little bit. This would show a little bit more data than we have. Unfortunately, I just didn't have that kind of time.
Yeah.
Again, and we're only in an hour-long podcast, hour and a half long podcast anyway. This could be like a 25 segment, show if we really wanted to.
So this is the mean. This is the general average that you calculated.
So the general average is 28.5% for charter schools, and the average for public schools is 52%.
or 52 points or whatever out of
So-
0 to 99
Yes. Yep. So
Okay.
public schools come in
on
at
average.
on average at almost double
Wow.
versus
Wow,
charter schools.
that's-
So that's when you were like, hey, where's my difference? That's
That's
actually
bad.
a pretty big difference on an average overall. So again, you'd want to do more of a weighted median type average, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, what we would be looking for is obviously the mean is somewhere around 28. So that would be the center. We'd be looking standard deviations to the left and the right. But, I mean, what that's going to do is essentially make any of those charter schools that are up at that 80 to 90%, 80 to 99, like those are going to be major outliers. And that the weight of this, like this, the core of stuff, obviously, since this is the average, is going to be down towards the bottom of that scale, which the public is kind of in the middle, which is, if you ask me, exactly where you want it to be.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, because you're never going to get perfectly scaled, because this would be scaled to the right or leaning to the right. If it was in a perfect world, public schools would be averaging 75, 80. But I mean, they're performing right in the middle. The majority of people in the middle, some schools are doing well, some schools are doing poorly, because that would be a bell curve from the halfway point, which it surprised me that charter schools, I mean, if they're so much better, why aren't they leaning to the right even more than public schools are?
Yes. Now, if you took your gap, right, and you actually look at what your achievement gap is, in fairness to public or to charter schools achievement gap comes in at 60, we'll just say 64.9%. So 65% essentially.
Okay.
The public school comes in at 47.5%.
Okay.
So that the lower number is worse, the higher number is better. So what does that tell us, Hannah? That tells us that it tells us two things, in my opinion. The first thing that it tells us is that charter schools are probably doing a little bit better job
Teaching everyone.
maintaining, everybody.
Yeah.
But their problem is they're maintaining everybody on the lower end of the state spectrum. So,
Yeah.
So that's not
So
good.
they're teaching everybody a little worse. So
Yeah. Yes.
everybody's consistently worse. Now, public schools are maybe not as consistently worse, meaning that there are probably more students at the low end and more students at the high end, less in the middle, but they're higher on average overall. So even the lower students are probably going to be on average higher than the lower students of the charter school.
Yes, because when you get into your public school, and your public school is the 52% statewide, and you're at a 47.5% achievement gap, the numbers for that, it's again very interesting to say, okay, yeah, that sucks. There is a larger gap, in public schools. Again, that tells you two things, right? The first thing it tells you is that because of that, if you were to bring up your statewide average, you should be able to bring up your gap because you are doing a few things right. It also does kind of benefit Betsy DeVos, in fairness to her. It benefits her point that charter schools on average are more consistent. They can teach, what they need to teach, and it gets them through things.
Yeah,
What
they just need
she
to do
has
a
to
little bit
focus
better.
on is, how do I bring that number up?
And another thing for this, we are having gone through this, and while we're going through this, and using this visual, we are definitely going to put either a public document, or we're going to take some screenshots of each page of this and put this up, because it really does help to have these numbers in front of you when you're going to. So anyone who's listening to this, if you're just jumped in here, you clicked into this spot or something, take a look into the documents. There's going to be a link there, at least to what we're looking at. We'll clean it up a little bit so it's not messy, but you're going to definitely need to see these numbers to really get a good idea, because listening to this would just be like listening to someone read you medical statistics in the hospital. It's just good. So we'll definitely take a look at that if you want to see these numbers, because the next table on here is like 8 feet long.
Yeah. And so, I did a couple other things. I did create my own weighted average, which again, we're not going to go through that because I would rather do the whole bell curve thing. I mean, when you weight your averages between the two, you come up with something very closer, to saying charter schools and public schools are very similar. And it kind of does take a little bit of the bite out of it. But in fairness, my weighted average is not something we did a lot of research on. It's just literally I took two numbers, put them together, and got an average. So we're not going to go over those. But when you look at your statewide rankings, and that's the big thing to look at, is when you look at the numbers and you go through all the different numbers, and I sorted it by ranking percentage, and then I put a total of how many public schools and how many charter schools. For the 99 percentile, there's 23 charter schools, or I'm sorry, 23 public schools and only 4 charter schools that hit that. And you can actually watch in fair consistency all the way down the graph. Public schools are far outweighing charter schools in terms of the number that they have, until you get down to the under 25 percentile mark. Then all of a sudden, charter schools jump up in a larger percentage than
that's where
do.
Yeah, that's where they're building up their gap achievements. But
yes,
yep.
For example, 7 percentile. Public schools are 14, charter schools are 13. Whereas, again, we said at the 99, or heck, we'll just pick at the 90th percentile, we had 26 public and 1 charter. So you're between 1 and 4 for charter schools, mainly between 1 and 3, all the way down until you hit that 25 percentile. Then it jumps and goes anywhere between 5 and 14.
Well, those are some pretty tough numbers there. I don't know. What we would like, if anyone else is checking this out, they should definitely take a look at some of our numbers and let us know what they think. We would love to hear from someone who's like a statistics guru, someone who really knows their stuff. That'd be awesome to hear a little bit more. Because, I mean, we both had our statistics in school, but this isn't something that we both do regularly. So we're doing the best we can with our numbers that we got. I'm gonna give it another shot and see if we can add some more data to it. But pretty much what the thing is for me is just that the statewide average versus from public to charter, it just shows that public schools are consistently right around the middle. Their achievement gap is still kind of right around the middle, and charter schools have a little bit better achievement gap, but they're lower overall, which once again is a clear indicator that the schools may be more consistent. But in order for me, having gone through a public school and really enjoyed my time there and got a great education, in my opinion, from a public school, it would take a charter school doing really well, like just blindsiding anything that I think I could get from a public school to make me change over from that. I mean, that's what it would take. And so like I don't see this performance standard being the thing that brings people to it. So what I see charter schools bringing people over to from would be race. I see, things that you're interested in, or there's certain cliques and things that the schools could provide that you may be able to, unfortunately keep your world experience bubble really small. Like that's the thing that I think, and I have thought that charter schools offer more of. So hopefully, I'm wrong, and that they are more diverse than I suspect. But this is just something from my personal experience. I really have never seen like charter schools push the diversity angle. They always say they're performing, they're better, preparing you for college and stuff. And these numbers from Michigan doesn't look like it.
Nope. Oh, thanks, Betsy Devos. With that being said, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to have our interview with Matthew James, a PHD Neuroscience author, talking about Jesus returning. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
Hey, this is Keith.
And this is Jen, and we're from Not Another Atheist podcast.
You're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Join the revolution.
Looking for something new and exciting, or maybe just a change from the old Atheist show format? Cellar Door Skeptics podcast provides listeners with hours of enjoyment each week on Spreaker and iTunes. Check us out as we talk politics, religion, science, reviews of books and music, along with the occasional interview just for a twist. Join Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern as they bring fresh content to you. Walk with us through the cellar door as we help you prepare for the revolution. You can find us on Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, and even on Facebook.
Hey, what's up? I'm Steve Hayes. And I'm Dave Curry.
And we're from Prophetcast.
And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics
on the Fox News Network.
They're not affiliated with Fox.
Everyone's a Fox affiliate.
Now, back to the show.
Welcome to the interview segment for Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all for sticking around. Tonight we have a wonderful author that we met, actually I believe through Twitter, probably about 2 years ago, when he was promoting his first book, Only an Atheist Can Help God Save the World. So tonight we decided to bring him back on to have another conversation about his new book. Please welcome to the show, Matthew James. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm good.
I guess it is not, when we're recording this, it is night, but it's day here. Because you're over in the UK, correct?
Yeah, it's the early evening for me. Kind of late afternoon, early evening.
Yeah. So you've only had a couple of drinks in you before we started tonight.
Indeed.
So Matthew came to us through Twitter, like I said, probably about 2 years ago when your first book came out. And I can't believe it's been 2 years already. You know, time flies so fast nowadays. But you came on to tell us a little bit about a very unique type book. Only an Atheist Can Help God Save the World. And it was kind of funny because at that time we were very aggressively, like atheist type podcasts, that we just got out of doing another atheist podcast. And then you brought a whole different type of satire, and then you even questioned whether the main character was going to become a Christian at the end. So
kind of.
You did, yeah. Because when we were interviewing, you were telling me all about it. You're like, yeah, I can't tell you, I can't ruin. I was like, yeah, don't spoil it for the listeners. So Matthew, tell us a little bit about your background again to get everybody kind of refreshed on who you are. And then let's launch into your new book.
Okay. So my background is neuroscience. I come from a scientific background. I've been to university, done a degree in PhD, lived in Canada for a few years, been back to the UK. And I am someone who was raised an atheist. I'm not religious. I never have been. So I don't have that particular perspective that certain people in the community do. Some of the guys have come from being raised Christian or Catholic or whatever else, and they've eventually come around to atheism, and that's where they come from. I started writing a while ago, but I guess it's about 10 years ago now, which is quite startling when you realize you've been writing for that long. And
is it like a life check for how old you are? You're like, oh shit, it's been 10 years.
Yeah, it is one of those things, definitely. Yeah. Well, it's also a case of when you're a writer, and when you start writing, you're obviously rubbish when you start out, because anything you do, you start out rubbish. But you have to keep going. If you're actually serious and interested in this as either as a career or just as a hobby or something you enjoy, then you keep going, you keep doing it. And at some point you realize, actually, I'm a writer. That's what I am. I've been doing this for a while now. You go back and you reread everything you did before and you go, well, that was utter rubbish. What the hell was I thinking? But where you are now, you're obviously better than you were then. So taking on the prospect of actually writing a novel is something, it's quite a challenge. It's one of those things where everybody thinks that they have a book to write. Everybody thinks I could do this. But then when you actually sit down and you go, right, I'm going to write a novel, and you start it, it's quite daunting. It's quite scary. So I was fortunate in that a couple of years ago when I was living in Canada, my current job I was in came to an end. And I then had a period of unemployment where I was getting government help. I'd paid into an insurance scheme that they have in Canada, the EI scheme, and I was getting a reasonable amount of money out. So I didn't have to go take some crappy job working in McDonald's. And I was able to then dedicate a chunk of my life to writing and pursuing this and to seeing whether I wanted to keep going. And that was when I started writing Only an Atheist Can Help God Save the World. Now, when I came on your show last, and I agree with you, I can't believe it's been 2 years. It's just, you look up and suddenly like 2 years have gone. It's like, wow. When I came on last time, I just about finished that book. It's a comedy satire where God is no longer in charge of heaven. He's lost control to the angels who find him to be very difficult to work for. He's a formerly wrathful God who has done all sorts of things wrong. He's sent plagues and famines and all this kind of stuff, and genuinely tortured people, especially humans. So now he finds he's in a position where he no longer has the power he had. He can't get anything done because the bureaucracy of heaven is just wrapping him up and stopping him from doing anything. But he needs to come to earth, and he needs to stop us from destroying ourselves, which is what we're currently in the process of doing. Climate change, deforestation, rising world temperatures, so on and so forth.
Leaving
Well,
the
this is a couple of
UN.
years ago, so yeah, that could be it. That's actually a sort of plot point of the new book is Donald Trump. Kind of. It's a very minor little thing, but he's in there just for a split second. Anyway, so I finished that book. I start plugging it on Twitter. I come on a few shows like yours, and I get to talk about it, which is tremendous fun, and I really enjoy it. Oh, congrats to you guys as well for getting to, is it 120 shows now?
Yeah, 120.
That's seriously impressive. My goodness, that is quite an achievement. So when God comes to earth, because of the rules under which he works, he can only seek help from certain people, and he ends up going to an atheist called Jeffrey, someone who doesn't believe in him. But when God is standing in your living room talking to you, it's kind of hard not to believe in him. They go on this crusade to try and save the world. But because of the difficulty of doing so and the belligerence of humans, spoiler alert, they don't succeed. So when you finish that book, nothing much has changed on Earth. Things have changed for God, things have changed for heaven and for other characters involved, but for us here, nothing has really changed. So I'm very much a believer in not writing sequels for stories. However, I did write a sequel for this book and have another one planned as well. And the reason I did is because I got sick one day and I had a fever dream. And in that dream, or in that kind of weird head state where you're half hallucinating, I had the idea for the second book. And once I've had the idea, there's no way I can't write it. Like, I have this thing where once I start one of these, once I get an idea for a project, once I get an idea for a short story or a novel, and I've gotten the idea down, I will come back to it and I will eventually see where it goes. So the second,
are you sure? Is it okay? In the UK, do they just call fever dreams? Is that just kind of like a code word for, like LSD or something like that? Are we sure that that's not what you were? You have to like make it PC, right? So that nobody knows you're a neuroscientist, for Christ's sake.
No, that would be a really good excuse if I actually had done that. But no, unfortunately, I didn't do that. That's what they say about all the people like the Beatles and the Stones. they all got drugged out in the 80s and 90s and wrote all their greatest hits and best songs because they were so out of it that they could write things like Yellow Submarine and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and the rest of them. But no, I did get sick. I had a fever. I had the idea for the second. So obviously when you're writing an atheist comedy book and the character of the first book is God, it's a relatively easy thing to go to the second book being about Jesus. So,
spoiler alert, is the third book about the Holy Spirit then?
Say again? I didn't hear you.
Is the third book about the Holy Spirit then?
No, the third book is going to be Lucifer, who is a character in the first and second, but he's a relatively minor player. Oh. And then it's going to be him paired with Jesus' daughter, who he has while he's on Earth. So her name's Lilith. Another nice biblical reference. It's a dark biblical reference, but the character's not dark, at least not the way I'm writing it at the moment. So when you get to the start of the second book, God has come to Earth, he's failed, and he's now made peace with not doing anything and leaving it be. But his son has gotten this idea in his head now, which is he can succeed where his dad failed. So Jesus has serious daddy issues. Jesus has issues with his father being the Almighty and him not ever being able to really measure up to who his dad is. I mean, who could? He's God. So Jesus returns to heaven.
Though, at the same time, right?
He's not. He's a very successful character, very successful guy, but he can obviously never measure up to his dad. So Jesus is a guy who is, whereas the angels and God act from without, Jesus acts from within. He comes to a world and he is reborn into the body of a native. And he then lives and grows up and is a part of that world. And his mission is then to become a mythological figure on each and every civilization and to steer the course of that world from within in whatever direction the angels and God and heaven decide that should go. So with us, it's Christianity, Catholicism, Islam. All the rest of them have their own versions of Jesus. So at the beginning of this book, he gets permission from the heavenly bureaucracy to come to Earth and to seek his mission here. So he comes here. The only problem with that plan that I just mentioned is it's really, really slow. It obviously takes a long time for him to grow up, to learn the languages, to become an adult. So now his plan is to come here and basically take over the body of a native, which is what he does. And then from no, it's a new character in this one.
Oh, whole new character? Oh, even better.
Well, he's reborn into the body of a guy in the Middle East because that's where his last mission was.
Uh-huh.
He gets reborn in, I believe it's Turkey in the book he gets reborn in. And from there, he sets about becoming a celebrity because his latest model of how to influence culture is he doesn't want to take the time to walk the land and preach to people. He would rather go the much faster route of becoming famous and then trying to convince us what we should be doing and how we should be changing. The biggest problem with this is once you're reborn into the Middle East as a Muslim man, you're going to have trouble getting into the American culture. You're going to have trouble getting people on this side of the world and in the West to listen to you. So he sets about becoming a magician. And then from there, he wants to reach a worldwide audience and convince people to change. But as I said, he's a dark-skinned man coming to the West, trying to tell us what to do, and
we know how that really works with Americans.
Say again.
So we all know how that works with Americans.
Exactly. And the biggest problem he runs into in this situation is American television networks, which we were talking about a few minutes ago. So I don't think I want to say too much more about the story because obviously from there, that's the setup. That's where he is, where he's coming from. Jeffrey will come back into it, but not in a particularly big way. He has a cameo role. God is in it as well, but again, it's in a sort of cameo role. And then there's a few other characters who get introduced who play more important roles. And Lucifer's in there for a bit as well. Jeffrey's wife, who was briefly in the first book, she has a much bigger role in this. But again, I'd rather not go too far into the story. I don't want to spoil it.
Well, I would agree. Yeah, we don't want to spoil. Don't want to spoil. We want everybody to go out and purchase it. One of the gimmicks that I liked in the first book and with the satire and how you took it as is it wasn't such a serious book to the point where you were trying to make this huge religious point, right? You didn't go out of your way to attempt to say, hey, this is exactly my opinion. You kind of left it open. Now we all know, as you mentioned earlier, you're a lifelong atheist, but you did kind of leave it open for interpretation. You weren't super crude and your whole point wasn't to just take this and destroy everything that everybody holds dear in terms of religion. All you did was take it and say, hey, can we have a little bit of fun? And maybe if it makes you disbelieve, great. And for the rest of us, like me, who don't believe anyway, it kind of makes it even, it's a lighthearted chuckle that says, hey, this is something I could share with my kids for the most part without having to, worry too much about some of the influences. So in your new book, do you kind of take that same theme, or do you get a little bit more serious, or do you kind of go on the exact opposite and just get extremely wacky with it?
Well, I'd rather not go on the attack with religion. I'd rather go for the comedy angle, for the satire. I feel like it's much easier to reach people if you can make them laugh. I also feel like it's much easier to have a discussion if you're not getting people's backs up. There is a certain amount in the first book of poking religion and saying this bit is silly, this bit is silly. We know the evidence for this says this. But I agree with you that it's much easier to come at it from a comedy point of view, to have a bit of fun with it and just not go at people. It's like I find a lot of atheists on Twitter. They really go at religious people. They have a big argument. They tell them they're stupid, or they point out fallacies in their argument, and you're not going to get through to people with that. It's much easier to tell a story, tell a joke, and then try and have a discussion through that perspective. Now, I would say the target in Jesus Returns. So I'm not actually sure if we mentioned the title of the book, but the second book is called Jesus Returns, Here He Comes Again. Now, have you seen? I'm sure you would have seen it. Have you seen the cover for this book?
Yes, I've seen the cover for the book.
I think when you're an independent author, you get cover agents, artists design you covers for your books. And the first one was designed by a lady, I forget her name, but she disappeared completely. And I had to get someone else to make the second cover. And when you're an independent author, you don't have the backing of a publisher or an agent. Everything comes out of your own pocket. So you don't want to spend a fortune on these things, especially when you're not even sure you're ever going to make your money back. But the woman who did the Jesus Returns cover is such a brilliant cover. Like, it's such a perfect image of Jesus in a robe with a smirk, and Jesus Returns just written all the way across the front. I love it. The target of this is much more celebrity culture, media, like we were talking about the media networks in America, where the way they go about stopping the conversation that people need to have, the way they attack people rather than attacking the argument. So if you're a progressive and you're trying to get a message through, it can be very difficult to get past yourself. It can be very difficult to get past you and any history you might have that they will hunt out and use to damage you. So the target of this is not so much religion and anything I might find silly religion. It's the lack of being able to have a conversation about things like climate change when those with vested interests are pushing an agenda that climate change isn't real, despite the fact we all know it is. They've pushed this agenda for decades now and really successfully managed to steer things away from any possible solutions. And in the book, that's the problem Jesus runs into. He's come here. He's been successful. He gets to go to America. He's a celebrity in the Middle East. And then he starts running into the trouble of the media in America, the news networks, finding any way they can to discredit people and to destroy them.
Yeah. And that's kind of, like I said, that's part of the interest in your books is that none of your stuff is that preachy. And when you get into it, I'm going to read a small excerpt. And This is one of the ones, I haven't finished it all the way through. I've gotten about 3/4 of the way through. But this is the one that I found pretty funny. This is about halfway through the book. So all of a sudden, she had, and I won't give the name away, she had left when it became obvious that his mood was not going to improve, when he was unable to pick himself back up. Look, it's been fun, she said, halfway out the door. And we both got what we needed out of it. Your star will continue to rise, and I get a day's worth of fame to help keep me where I am. Plus, the sex was good too, she said as an afterthought. At that point, Jesus finally realized that he had been used. And so as you read through this book, right, like, it's, again, for somebody like me who grew up very religious, sometimes it's hard to associate. You hear Jesus and you see him doing all these things, and you're like, all right, hold on a second. None of this makes sense. And then all of a sudden that comes in, you go, hey, if I wanted to, you could actually take that and go like super deep into it, because how many people use that name to get what they want, right? Or to chastise other people. But instead, he just self-broods. He just goes the complete opposite direction and just gets super depressed and says, well, people keep using me. This is ridiculous. But again, if you go back to the comic value of it and you go back to, well, look at it in today's society, what if he existed, what would he actually feel about people using his name for ridiculous things? And here in this way, you went the complete opposite and said, well, Jesus would just be really demoralized and depressed.
I love it when you can talk to people about people who've read your work and to see what people get out of it, because I've had different conversations with different people, mostly friends, family, or people like yourself who run podcasts who've read it, and you always get something different from each person. It's a really fascinating experience talking to and seeing what people get out of it. For me, that scene's about halfway through the book. Jesus has inadvertently fallen into a relationship with somebody that he definitely shouldn't have done. And she has used him in this situation, as you said. But the thing is, for him, his life is all about using other people. His life is all about, he's famous, he's a celebrity. Everybody does exactly what he wants all the time. And he's a whiny little bitch about it, is what I would say. I mean, he's not a nice person. He's a jerk. He really is. And it's really funny as well when you write someone who's a jerk, because in the previous book, God's quite a nice character, even though he's clueless and useless. Jeffrey's a nice guy. There's nobody in that book. I mean, the demon in the first book is the only character who is really unpleasant. And he was tremendous fun to write. And my wife said she loved him. My mum said she loved Lucifer in the first book. Really fun, dark character, really interesting. But in this one, an awful lot of the book is about Jesus finally changing and Jesus finally growing up. I mean, he's an angry little man who is pissed at his dad and has been for a long time. And he's just doing the same thing again and again and again, and nothing is changing. So a lot of the arc of the story of this book is about him finally growing up, maturing, and then changing the way he does things. But he is a jerk. I mean, he treats people like crap. One of the other bits I was going to mention that I really like in the book that I thought was quite a good illustration of the kind of thing you were talking about was when he goes to a church in America, and he walks into this church, and he's been in America for a while, and he's not really getting the kind of fame and attention he thinks he should be getting. And he walks into a church and he sees an image of himself, this beautiful, beautified image of him with perfect hair and perfect teeth and white skin. And you're going, wait, he was a Middle Eastern man born 2,000 years ago when they didn't have hair gel and hair products, when they didn't have dental health. How could you seriously ever equate this mythological figure, this person, with the image we see today? It's just, I mean, that is still me poking fun a bit at religion, but that is a very silly, funny. I mean, honestly, guys, come on.
Yeah, who can imagine? Who would even imagine that? And that's kind of funny because, I grew up in, America, in white bread central Ohio, right? And we had all those images, and I can actually go back and look at some of the old children's Bibles, and you kind of go, yeah, know how many people aren't actually the correct color? And like, oh my God, I can't even believe, like, you never would have thought of that, right? One of the things too, if you kind of think about it, right? And maybe again, this is just a deeper look at it. His journey is growing up, right? His journey is becoming more of a individual that can accompany and be a part of everything else. Well, if you actually take Christianity, right? And we'll just take that one today. And you look at how the religion has evolved over the last 4,000 years. It's now a more humanistic type religion. And now I'm not going to say that for everybody listening, I'm going to get 100 million emails about how I just said Christianity is humanistic. But in reality, if you think about the horribleness that happened 4,000 years ago, that doesn't happen in the same way today, you can actually see the evolution. Now, is it what we would want? Like, I'm a secular humanist. I would rather that be the driver. But, some people want that thing to believe in. But you can see the progression that Christianity has made.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because in your book, that kind of reflects that without even calling it to big attention.
So I would say, for all the faults of religion, for all the faults of church, I would also say it's undeniable that they've done a lot of good. I mean, I'm not sure where the scales lie on the balance of good versus bad, but I mean, in the UK, we're pretty secular now. Well, very secular, I would say. But people still cling to religion for all sorts of reasons. But one of the reasons they do is because of the sense of community it brings. And I feel like in the current age, in the current era, with everything seemingly fracturing, that's a very big positive and a very big plus. And unfortunately, until we find a way to replace that community sense and community spirit for people who miss it when it's gone, I think religion still has a place within our society. So what you said about Jeffrey at the end of the last book, almost becoming Christian at the end, he doesn't, but there is a definite sense that he goes away to create an atheist organization at the end of the first book, and in the beginning of the second, that's where he is, and it's also where he'll be at the beginning of the third. But his organization would hopefully fill some of those things that have been lost, with the loss of community, with the fracturing of the way things are going for us at the moment. And I have that unfortunate feeling that with the rise of Donald Trump, with the way Russia's acting with the world, with North Korea, all the rest of it, that feeling of isolation and loss of community is going to continue until we find a way to reverse it. I don't know how that happens, but I'd love to know what the answer is.
I would agree. So as we wrap it up, yeah, I have one more question for you. And if anybody who wants to, we have all the links in the description, both for the Amazon and the Smashwords account. We actually bought ours off of Smashwords, but you can buy it in both places. I don't know which one's more profitable for you, so you can tell everybody.
I think they're about the same, but most people buy it from Amazon because it's easy.
Yeah. I have to ask. So the cover is called Jesus Returns, Here He Comes Again, right? And on the cover, you got this picture of Jesus.
Yeah.
Now, I'll be honest, the only reason I don't like this on my Amazon account is because you know how many suggestions I get now? Your book, in fairness, looks like some of these other prophet series. Like, I'm getting now positive energy, and I'm like, no, I don't want that. 31 prayers seeking the heart of God. No, I don't want any of that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So the question is, I guess two questions. The first one is, have you ever had any Christians email you pissed off that they bought a book that looks like it's a Christian book? Because in fairness, it really, you could put that next to, I don't know, what's that crappy Kirk Cameron book series, Left Behind. You could put it next to Left Behind, and I wouldn't know without reading it. So have you had anybody email you or call you or whatever they contact you as? A, and B, did you do that on purpose just to kind of stimulate the conversation?
So I've only so far that I know of had one Christian person read it, and it's a family friend, and she read it and she enjoyed it, and she said she didn't like how preachy it was at points, which was interesting. I would love to get the perspective of some more hardcore Christians, Muslims, Catholics, whatever, to see what they make of it, because I honestly don't know what the reaction would be. I would think it would be a hilarious reaction, or it would be outright anger and furiousness. I've been followed on Twitter a couple of times by people who in their bio say Christian or whatever denomination, and they don't usually stay around for too long. They usually leave pretty quick once they realize that this is not that, whatever it was they thought this was. As for the Amazon thing, I don't know how the algorithms work on Amazon and how I would get them changed so that I could be linked with books that fit the tone more. I mean, people who've written reviews for me on Amazon have compared it to Douglas Adams, Terry Pratchett, very, very kindly, in my opinion, but they've put it in that ballpark. And I would say it's more like Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, which is a wonderful, wonderful religious fantasy comedy book that doesn't do what I do, which is try and poke fun at religion a bit. That's much more straight up, just angels and demons on earth trying to save the world. It's a similar sort of prospect. Hilarious book, that book. I was offered a review by a very aggressive Christian blogger. So I sent him a free copy of the book. And unfortunately, I never heard back, because I suspect I would have gotten an absolute slamming by him saying, how dare you? And the thing about that is, firstly, I wouldn't care. He can say what he likes. I would just find it funny. Secondly, I would have taken all of those. If he wrote me a scathing 1-star review on Amazon, I would have proudly tweeted that out saying, here's what a religious person thinks. Because you just know that all the atheists who I follow and who follow me would be taking notice of that even more than other reviews by atheists. They'd probably like to know what Christians and religious people would think, because I think they'd find that a good reason to read the book. I think that would be hilarious.
Very true. Matthew, it's been a pleasure as always. I'll let you get back to your tea and scotch or whatever you're drinking tonight. And make sure everybody goes out, checks out the links in the description. Jesus Returns, Here He Comes Again. New book, and we may even see an audio version of this in the future. We may even see an audio version of this. Matthew, thank you for joining us tonight, and it was a pleasure talking with you again.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
Hello, I'm Miss B. Haven.
I'm Demanda Wright.
And we're
promoting secular feminism. And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Considering how you want to help Cellar Door Skeptics, head over to iTunes or your favorite podcast app and give us a rating, because every rating helps push us in front of new listeners. And since our main goal here at Cellar Door Skeptics is to provide the most accurate information possible, we hope that more ratings will mean that more people get to hear the topics that we're presenting. We don't insist that we get a 5-star rating, but Hannah's favorite number is 5, and the more gold stars he gets, the more special he's gonna feel. So what do you say? Head on over to iTunes or Google Play, give us a rating, and help engage with Cellar Door Skeptics today.
This is Trav Mamone, host of the By Any Means podcast, and you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics. Prepare for the revolution. We have cookies.
Now, back to the show.
And welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. That was an amazing interview. And I'm sorry, when the guy is a neuroscientist, you know, he has a PhD, he is an amazing individual, but yet he writes fiction.
He's prolific as hell. Like, he's done a ton of stuff. Like, he's always working on something. That's pretty cool. I mean, I like how he's got a really diverse pile of stuff that he's done. He isn't just like talking about one thing. Like, he kind of bounces all over. He's got a really wide berth. He's pretty good at what he does.
So, if you are interested, there is links in the description. Like we said, we will make sure that again, we have them back on once we get through the whole book. I got about 3/4 of the way through it before our interview, and I have about a quarter to go. So hopefully within the next month, Hannah will get his hands on it and be able to read it as well. For the last segment, we decided to talk about nuclear fusion. Not just because we're nerds, not just because we like science, but because this new discovery is actually pretty neat. So, Hannah, tell us how you stumbled on these specific articles.
Well, this is kind of one of those stories that in some of the science places that I wander, it just showed up everywhere. It was on March 14th is when it pretty much broke across the internet. And the big thing is people, you always hear about nuclear fusion being like the perfect energy source. The nuclear fission is what we do in our nuclear reactors, which is not quite the same. And nuclear fusion is what's going on inside the sun. We're taking a lower element and turning it into a heavier element. So we're fusing protons and we're taking hydrogen and turning it into helium, essentially in the sun. And then the further out it goes, it happens more and more, and the materials get more and more dense. Once you get past the basic metals, then supernova are needed to use nuclear fusion and to form those heavier elements. But we haven't been able to create any kind of fusion with any sustainability on Earth. And so when this happens, when news studies comes out like this, that it bounces all over and people get really excited about it. And what these guys did was something that was kind of like taking the whole idea of the fusion thing and scaling it down so that it'll fit in like a community college lab. That's the cool part. So, I mean, I guess really what it comes down to it's at Colorado State University. And one of the links that we have is directly from Colorado State University, from the Walter Scott Junior College of Engineering. And what these kids did was, and I'm assuming there's probably a professor or two in there, but I'm gonna call them kids because they're still in college. And I'm an old crusty old man now, But
very old.
But what basically nuclear fusion is the power of the sun. That's what I've been saying before. And but we've been able to make some sort of nuclear fusion, but in super high energy necessity experimentation and stuff. So what these kids did at the Colorado State University laboratory did it on a smaller scale. So they used a small but powerful laser to heat these things called nanowires. And so have you heard of the carbon fibers, the carbon nanotubes?
Yes, we actually yes and no. Okay. I don't know a lot about them, but the company I work for actually has carbon fiber furniture that weighs less than 5 pounds.
Yeah. That's
so
kind of
it's
a little
not
bit
the exact same thing. I get it, but
the idea is using like the fibers though, like that. But the carbon nanotubes are in chemistry. Carbon is one of the best elements that combines to itself in these really strong bonds. There's covalent and ionic bonds. The covalent bonds in chemistry between atoms is the best kind, and carbon does a really good job doing that because it has 4 loose electrons. It loves to bind to just about everything. It's one of the reasons why we are carbon-based life forms. Anyways, these carbon nanotubes, it's basically one string of carbon atoms in a row, and they're incredibly strongly bonded together. And so these tubes are incredibly powerful, and they can be used for all kinds of stuff. And so if you imagine, one row of carbon atoms in a line, well, these aren't particularly that thin, but these are nano wires. And what they're doing is they're taking it's a polyethylene material. And I don't know if you're familiar with polyethylene. Is
yes.
That's the plastic that's in milk jugs. It's got really, really long strains, and it's a stringy plastic, which means that when it's liquid, it can be stretched into really long, super skinny threads. And that's kind of what they're doing with this. Is so they use this polyethylene plastic, and they use deuterated polyethylene, which it's deuterium. It's a heavier hydrogen atom, and it's found in like really ionic and weighted water. So if you've ever heard of heavy water, those kinds of things are the kinds of things that have these hydrogen with extra ions, basically. And this is a very specific type of material that's super, super thin. And if you go to the CSU lab page, you can see pictures of it. There's these tiny little things, but they're blasting these little fibers with lasers. This is way more powerful than the Dr. Evil Austin Powers
on the shark. Get my laser.
Yeah, the laser beams. And what they did was they basically took this from a small scale, and like the things that they said is that they've been using these huge, massive multi-$100 million lasers housed in stadium-sized buildings. That's what we think of when we do these experiments. And so now this stuff here,
well, it's like cell phones way back in the day, right?
Kind of. I don't know. I don't know if I would take a stadium-sized building into like a backpack. I don't know if the comparison is quite there, but like we could probably say like going from how a computer used to be an entire floor on a skyscraper to your phone has an infinite amount of computing capabilities over those old computers. So
because my dad had my dad's always worked in the server field and different things like that, and he always had huge server rooms back in the late 80s, and I would be a kid running through them, and they would have to all be air conditioned. It would be warmer in the office than it would be in the server rooms all year round. And you would run through them. They're like little mazes. They're huge.
Oh, yeah.
Huge. And nowadays, computing power, you look at it like completely different. Like the server rooms are now being stored on clouds. That's like how different it is.
It's just an entire server room is just it would be stored in one blade in a server nowadays. Like
yes.
If you're familiar with the way the servers are, it's just a single blade with how many gigs of information and everything. So we're talking scaling down. So this could potentially be an instance where we're seeing a scaling down. So this team, they created with an ultra fast, high powered tabletop laser they built from scratch. So they're doing their own type of thing. This isn't something you just buy at a store. With this super fast pulse laser, irradiates a target of those invisible wires I was talking about. Like we're talking electron microscopes to see. These are really, really small. And what they do is they instantly create extremely hot, dense plasmas. And these conditions are approaching those inside the sun. So these lasers heat this stuff up at an atomic scale almost. We're down to the electron microscope necessities. I think it's they don't have a scale specifically on there. They have let's see if they had a scale on the image. But if you take a look at it, you can see it looks like the super zoomed in microscope looks of like the human tongue with all the little taste buds on it. But these conditions are closing to those inside the sun, and so these plasmas drive fusion reactions, and so they're giving off helium, and what this from the hydrogen in those that deteriorated polyethylene. So that extra hydrogen atom that we were talking about, that in that plastic is that's what they're heating up. And so the plastic is kind of like a storing house for that hydrogen. And when they plasma or they blow these wires into plasma, it's giving off this hydrogen and it's causing fusion and it's giving out helium. And so what it's also doing is blowing flashes of energetic neutrons out as well. And that's one of the things that they're talking about is we're approaching fusion that we can kind of control and create, but also it's doing all these things with flashing out neutrons, and neutrons can be used in a whole bunch of other stuff.
So I might get my photon phaser pretty soon, right? I'll be able to kill some Klingons, or I don't know, maybe some Borg.
I don't know if the neutron thing is as bad. I mean, if you think that you could just make a gun that shoots out X-rays, because it's kind of comparable. I mean, it's like you could be like, okay, I'll shoot you with my X-ray gun. You'll be dead in about 30 years after this concentrated blast. I mean, I'm going to give you cancer of the shoulder. I guess that's pretty much what it would be. It's like these neutron blasts. There's also a link that we're going to create from the Paul Scherrer Institute. And what they're doing is they're talking about neutron imaging. And it's kind of working in the same way to what an X-ray does. But X-rays pick up on metal and things with properties basically similar to metal, and plastics not so much. Well, the neutron imaging, it can see different types of stuff significantly better. Like it can see plastics better, and so you can see the interior components. You can see fractures and cracks and things that you may not be able to see in very specific, practical, industry related problems, things that we can't see. This new type of imaging may do that, but this is also something that can be used possibly in the medical field. So like maybe viewing parts of the human body that the X-rays weren't very good at, and you couldn't just jump into an MRI machine every time you needed to have something looked. Maybe this neutron imaging would be something that could innovate and help people find, I don't know, maybe bone cancers way faster. There's all kinds of different things, there's speculations that this could do. So this is a side effect. This is science creating new things that we could do potentially with this, and on top of that, we're learning more about nuclear fusion. It's just
technically God created these things. We're just discovering them, Hannah. I mean, get it right. Didn't you listen to Jesus Returns interview? I mean, come on. But okay, I agree with you. This is actually extremely interesting. And yeah, I joke about having a phaser. I was just more saying, hey, we get lasers, and super fancy lasers that can destroy things. Could you use that laser to do damage?
Yeah.
But when we talk about fusion energy, we're talking about a new type of energy source, right? This is a new source of energy that is being discussed, and we're now finally able to actually gain a larger output from this, more of the fuel than what we're putting into it, right? And that's amazing. Yeah. Because what could that do? I mean, they talk about, essentially fusion being, the heart of stars. That's what fuels the star, right? That's what fuels the sun. It's amazing to think if we could harness that type of energy, what we could do with it in terms of where we could go.
Well, essentially mini stars. The biggest issue is trying to get more energy out of what you put into it. But there's another thing that we have on here from pbs.org that this is from California, the national Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California, and from February 12th, 2014, they had a fusion experiment that got more energy out of the fuel that they basically blasted with lasers than what they put into it. That's kind of the point, right? Like, you don't want to have to spend $100 worth of energy to get $40 back. And so what they did was they shot 192 lasers in an apparatus the length of 3 football fields into a 1/2-inch long gold cylinder. like that's an unbelievable amount of equipment, but they got more energy out of blasting that gold cylinder than they did putting it in with that huge apparatus. So this was 2014, and we were seeing a net gain in energy because of these basic part of and so this new one is obviously kind of a shrinking down, but potentially easier to do.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's nice. That's nice. That I enjoy that. I think that's a good way to end the show. Essentially, we talk about fusion a little bit. We get to talk about the new experiments that are coming. It's a nice break from all of the garbage that we had to hear about Betsy Devos. So
that's kind of what I wanted to put it on there, just because science is awesome, and we haven't talked about it so much because the world's on fire, and science is just struggling away. But I mean, you got to talk about that too, because hopefully in 4 years we'll have a change around, and maybe people will be a little bit more level-headed around here.
Exactly. So as we wrap the show up, we talked about Betsy Devos. We talked about an amazing author. We got to talk about nuclear fusion. We're getting very close to the Michigan Atheist Convention. We will put those links in the description. If you live in Michigan or the surrounding states and you want to come see Hannah and I speak, we are the first speakers of the day. We get about a half hour to an hour worth of time to speak. We're going to have a great topic talking about raising secular children in a Christian environment. We're going to do it kind of from a dual perspective. So there's going to be that. But in all fairness, we do really genuinely look forward to meeting everybody that we can meet at the Michigan Atheist Convention. With that, we want to thank everybody for joining us for another amazing episode and making 120 a very special number. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker, cellardoorskeptics.com.